obstacles. It can be a pretty straightforward project. And then project B, where may have a lot of more complexities, may have wetlands or water bodies, may have obstacles. It can be a pretty straightforward project. There may be a lot of more complexities. And then project B, where may have a lot more complexities, may have just looking at wetlands or water bodies, may have obstacles. It can be a pretty straightforward project. There may be a lot of more, and then project B, where may have a lot more complexities, may have what may go into your study. And so some of these bullets here listed on the slide are some of the things that may be looked at within your particular project, within the particular feasibility study, really depending on the context of that area. So, but just gives you an idea of some of the things that may be involved. The next slide. Okay, importance of the feasibility studies. What will they help you do? We'll kind of go through some of this information later, but as you see here, develop and comprehensively evaluate preliminary alternative design alternatives. So there will be some desktop analysis, and then also going out in the field, looking at the site, doing some observations and work in the field. There's engaging public landowners and stakeholders. I think with the planning effort that maybe preceded this, where the project was identified, you may have established local support for this project, but this is really diving into it further, getting more input from property owners and those, et cetera, along the project corridor. Really want local support for moving forward with these. And then better understand potential project costs and avoid underfunding projects. As many of you may know, DOT is reevaluating a lot of their cost estimates now for projects that have been identified in STIP. And so there's a lot of things that have changed with materials costs, with inflation, and those elements, but really establishing more firm costs as part of this process too. And then understanding how to implement your project, really identifying partners. There may be relationships established actually doing this feasibility study that can kind of carry it forward and forward eventually toward implementation as well. So we can move on to the next slide. Eligible projects, these really, as I mentioned before, we're focusing on paved trails and sidewalks, and kind of view paved trails as interchangeable and greenways, side paths, multi-use paths, and shared use paths. But the idea is, a paved facility 10 feet or greater that provides for bike and ped travel. So, and sidewalks, of course. Next slide. Side path, this is, a couple slides here under when we think of paved trails. A side path, as you can see here, is typically along a roadway corridor. It may be a biking, walking, or particularly biking alternative to on road, where it may be safer to be on a separated facility. The hope is kind of that this corridor is on where there's fewer conflicts, intersecting roads conflicts, where there may be fewer conflicts with potential turning vehicles. But the idea is that it does provide for both bicycles and pedestrians in one type of facility. So, and next slide. While a greenway will not be necessarily along the roadway corridor, paralleling the roadway corridor, it will be, more commonly located along streams, utility corridors, and those types of areas. And you all kind of familiar with kind of the image here. That's typically what we are talking about. If it can take a different form as well, but this is also used, as both bicycles, pedestrian, multimodal needs as well. So, and the next slide, and this is your standard sidewalk, 5-6 feet in width, typically greater in more urban areas or Main Street areas. So we're really mainly looking at pedestrians along these types of facilities, but at times, of course, bicyclists and scooters and other type scooters may use these as well. But really identifying pedestrian needs when we're looking at these types of projects. So the next slide. Eligibility. Those are the types of projects I just mentioned. Now we want to see what agencies are eligible to submit projects for our grant program. And these are the ones here in the bold that are any municipality or county with North Carolina, regional planning organizations, metropolitan and rural. And then also, as you see there, bicycle, pedestrian, and transit advocacy groups Friends of Trail Groups and Land Conservancies. I think a lot of our grant programs, a lot of the work of DOT, MPOs, RPOs, and many municipalities and counties already have some relationships and work. But I think some of this third group, there may be a little more extra step or two to get access to this grant program. But and we've had some conversations with some folks, but just communicate with Joe or me if you have any issues with getting access to our grant program if you're any of these groups. And then as it says on the right there, college, universities, and business and privileged districts are not eligible. Next slide. Okay, selecting the right program. This, I mentioned this before, but the multimodal planning grant program is the plan that IMD has had in place since 15 to 20 years. And we've funded about 250 bicycle pedestrian multimodal plans. And it is really establishing a network for your community and developing a framework for developing out that network. While the Paved Trail Sidewalk Feasibility Study Grant Program is ideally kind of pulling a project or corridor from one of these planning efforts and doing a little more analysis of it, doing a little more engineering analysis, looking at that particular project corridor to see is it feasible to kind of pursuing developing that project and looking at different alternatives that may be most appropriate. So that's kind of how we kind of distinguish these. And we did launch the Paved Trail Feasibility Study Grant Program in November. And in January, we've been launching the multimodal planning grant program. If you all have any questions on the difference in this, please let us know. Okay, next slide. Okay, Joe, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the study development. So feasibility study scale, project budgets are contingent upon the corridor context and complexity. These guidelines are provided to help determine the scale of the project. The development of a small scale study, of course, will differ from that of a large scale study. The following should be considered in the development of the study: cost, number of route alternatives, mileage range, jurisdictional range, corridor constraints, and community and stakeholder engagement expectation. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So you see on the slide here, we have a chart that breaks down the two different study options that we have. We have a small scale feasibility study and a large scale feasibility study. For the small scale, the cost is between $60,000 and $80,000. The large scale is between $80,000 and $120,000 plus. Of course, the larger we get, the more complex and extensive the corridor, that will result in a higher plan cost. For the small scale study, the number of route alternatives, we're looking for up to 4 alternatives to be evaluated small scale. And then large scale, we're looking at usually greater than 4 alternatives to be evaluated as part of the feasibility study. And the mileage range for small scale studies is about a 1/4 mile to 3 miles. For large scale studies, that's 3 to 15 plus miles. The jurisdictional range for small scale studies will be up to 2 jurisdictions along the corridor. And for large scale feasibility studies, 2 or more jurisdictions along the corridor. And if there are 2 or more, that may require additional jurisdictional meetings and coordination. Looking at corridor constraints for those small scale feasibility studies, we're looking at minimal utilities, moderate topography, smaller FEMA study streams such as creeks and streams, moderate roadway characteristics and constraints such as minor road crossings, moderate to high traffic volumes, and moderate to high speed limits. On the large scale feasibility studies, the corridor constraints include rail corridors and crossings, significant roadway characteristic constraints such as controlled access roadways, major road crossings, high traffic volumes, and high speeds. Larger FEMA studied streams and the large scale feasibility studies, your major water bodies, your rivers, and your lakes, as well as moderate to significant utilities and significant topography challenges. In the small scale feasibility study for community and stakeholder engagement expectation, small scale, we're looking at 3 steering committee meetings, will most likely be virtual, 1 online survey and 1 public meeting, and up to 4 focused stakeholder meetings, which include landowners, local businesses, underrepresented groups, etc. One-on-one, or this may include multiple stakeholder per meeting. And in the large scale feasibility studies, the stakeholder engagement expectation there is 4 to 5 steering committee meetings, which can be virtual, 1 online survey, 1 public meeting, and up to 8 focused stakeholder meetings that could be one-on-one or include multiple stakeholders there. So this chart is provided on the application and will be provided online for reference. But just to give an idea of the breakdown there as you all are considering what type of study you'll be submitting, the small scale to the large scale. Looking at the feasibility study content standards overall, I don't think any surprises here, but so the deliverable that we'll have will include a cover design, of course, the acknowledgments in the study, table of contents, and your executive summary. That includes sections, an introduction to the project area, your existing conditions, etc. And then a look at study considerations and your alternatives development. We'll have a section on that, as well as a section on community involvement. Evaluation and recommendations, and then an implementation plan for those recommendations, and then of course any information that needs to be included in appendices. So there is a content standards PDF on the grant program webpage for more information on these content standards. So looking at the study development process itself, generally it'll go through a pretty similar flow as we have here. Of course, starting with the project team to reflect on the study content standards, again, looking at your small scale versus your large scale, your initial steering committee, a working group kickoff, and then included in that will be consultant research, field work, and an existing conditions analysis. Then, of course, your route alternatives development will be included in there after you've got your existing conditions, public input, and that leads us to route recommendations. Those recommendations will also include project cut sheets. As I mentioned earlier, the study implementation strategies, and then, of course, finalizing with study review and adoption. So looking at the community engagement piece as part of the feasibility study, we'll look to summarize any prior engagement of activities and results. We'll create a steering committee or working group of 10+ members comprised of agency staff, civic leaders, and local advocates to guide the planning and development process. To gather input on goals and objectives, existing condition, priority projects, and implementation strategies. The community engagement will host stakeholder and landowner meetings along the corridor, and we utilize survey tools to gather input, consider online and paper copies, and in-person or virtual meetings and workshops. Looking at the study considerations for alternatives development. So we'll discuss the following relevant considerations in the study. We'll, of course, look at the planning level considerations, the natural environment considerations, as well as the human environment considerations in the project area. Conduct field observations to inventory conditions as a basis for planning. Field observations will include a site review of the transportation context, utilities, topography and terrain, surrounding land use, looking for wetlands, rivers, streams, creeks, and other surface waters, etc. The alternatives development process, so we'll provide selected design criteria and desired typical section information to be used when developing alternatives for your feasibility study. The overall project corridor may be divided into segments or key areas as necessary. So if you have a longer corridor looking at, maybe there's an A segment or a B segment, we'll describe opportunities and constraints associated with each area, including photos and maps, and develop alignment alternatives within each segment and area. So as I mentioned earlier, the difference in the small scale and the large scale studies with different number of alternatives involved. We'll also identify and discuss the potential connections and access areas, such as trailheads, et cetera, that might exist along the corridor, and summarize the results of the preliminary modeling that may have been. The route recommendations, this will include the following. So we'll identify and map the alternatives for the evaluation in the study. The study will develop methodology for evaluation of those alternatives, and then evaluate the alternatives and provide a decision matrix as part of the study. That table will show the score and relationship between the alternatives for the evaluation criteria. The study will also provide recommendation and justification for the preferred alternative, including alignment, typical sections, road crossing treatments, access points, which may include trailheads, parking lots, and connecting trails. And then this section will also discuss recommended trail amenities, placemaking opportunities, wayfinding, potential branding, and any other design elements related to that, if applicable. As I mentioned, this project will develop cut sheets for those alternatives. So if phasing is recommended in this, there will be a cut sheet for each of the phases that this might go through. These cut sheets will include an alignment map, a brief description with typical sections, renderings, accessibility and connectivity, demand and density, potential permitting needs. This will highlight the potential right-of-way and easement acquisition needs along the corridor, as well as some estimated cost information. Cut sheets will be suitable for communities to use in the strategic prioritization process, the capital improvement plan budgeting and or the pursuit of federal funding. So just really, again, hitting on the point that the real objective is to do these feasibility studies and then move them to the next phase of acquisition and then construction. So just to give you a sense of what the visualizations and the renderings will look like as part of this study. So you can see here one of the pilot studies that we did from Marion as a Marion side path concept. So we've got the visualization of the alternative that has been developed here in the project area. You can see that there's pavement markings highlighted, there's crosswalk markings and things like that. So this will be included as part of the visualizations for the different alternatives that are selected. And then, as I mentioned, the implementation guidance. So this will identify partners and their respective responsibilities in the project, list key action steps to see the project from planning to construction. So just based off of where the project is, this could be all the way from the concept level, or if there's been previous acquisitions made, things like that. Establish a committee to oversee the implementation of the project, identify funding resources available, identify STIP-ready projects, and establish a lead agency for the construction of the projects, the implementation of the program recommendations and policy revisions. And this will also include coordination with the local NCDOT Highway Division as well as IMD staff. Okay, John, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, this section, as it says there, is webpage resources. First of all, there's multiple documents here: program overview, FAQs, content standards, and application questions. Those are all located on the Connect page at the link at the bottom of the page of the slide, and also the two pilot feasibility studies. Some of the images and other information you saw on what Joe just presented, what were derived from these two studies recently completed. And those final copies are available also on the Connect page. So I encourage everyone to review those, have a look at those, and kind of see what you all may be, final product may be, and it kind of works for what your needs are. So there's another, the last bullet here. We'll just talk a little about the Great Trail State Network, and then there's also a little bit additional slide will be on our transportation disadvantage index as well. So. Next slide. Okay, these next few are just kind of go through these quickly. These are the documents that are available on our Connect page. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, everything we're talking about here in this webinar is located on these documents. So you all can easily find anything you may have missed by exploring some of these documents on our website. But there is the program overview. Includes these elements: program background, who can apply, what is a feasibility study, which what I talked about earlier. Joe kind of went through some of what is the right size study for the project. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of these selection criteria and grant award process. So next slide. FAQs. Some of this overlaps with the program overview, but we kind of try to come up with some questions that we thought the folks may ask. And I think this could probably be more of a fluid document as we receive questions through this webinar and afterwards, and the ones that we received prior to this webinar as well, that we can add to these FAQs as well. So, but these are some of the things that we have included in there that we already have discussed on this webinar. There's also the fourth bullet there is a local match required. We can talk about that a little bit later. I believe that's in the next section where that's not required, but it is we do accept it, and it could impact if there is many projects that we received and very competitive, then perhaps local match could be a factor in selecting an individual application. So, and there's other information here, what type of systems available to communities, and again, that's kind of reaching out to IMD for support. So, next slide. Content standards. Joe kind of touched on this a little bit in the last section, but there is a document for content standards, and as you go into that, well, on the left, I guess is kind of what the sections that you will see in the actual feasibility study document. as you look at the PDF, look at that content centers document, you'll see it's rather comprehensive. There are kind of want to capture everything that potentially go into an individual feasibility study, but that would be like kind of the most complex feasibility study. So really the content will be determined by the local context, the need for that area. So a lot of the elements some of the elements that would be identified in the content centers may not be appropriate for your feasibility study, or some may not, but just kind of keep that in mind as you have a look through that. Next slide. Application questions. We put this on here, as I mentioned before, you will have to go through our EBS grant management system to actually get into the application. And you can save it within that, but we provided a document on the Connect page so you can have a look at the questions before you actually go in to see, to kind of get prepared as you complete the application process. So the PDF here is exactly like what will be in the EBS grant management system once you get into that. So, but these are some of the questions that you will see: summary of the project, study vision and goals, overview of study location and study limits, reasons the community needs this study. We really want to look at what, multimodal connections. Also, if there is a greater need for disadvantaged population in the area, we want to kind of acknowledge that and hopefully be able to address that. So really kind of clarifying the importance of providing this type of facility. Key opportunities and constraints. Summarize other plans and sites that have been done. I think we talked about our multimodal planning program, but if plan has, I think that is a requirement for this. So if identifying what plans were in place to identify that this particular project. Community involvement as well, and stakeholder support, really looking at how the community may have in the past supported multimodal projects, funded that type of thing, and how well that's supported in the community. So something we may be looking at when we're reviewing the applications. Next slide. And these are web page resources. These two documents we talked about earlier are on the website. These are the two pilot studies that were completed earlier this year. So I encourage you to take a look at those. Next slide. Our Great Trails State Plan. I guess the image here is a little bit older. This has been adopted. It is finalized early this year. It is on our website. The link here is for our interactive map. So then the network is identified and that plan is available through an interactive online map. But we worked on this for a couple of years. This plan wrapped up earlier this year, as I mentioned, and the idea was to establish a paved trail shared use path network across the state. So looking at connecting all counties in the state and looking at connecting natural resources to other prime origins destinations. So we completed that, established a network, has online presence, and now we're trying to do it through various measures for implementing that plan and developing the network. And I think some things with the Great Trails, Year of the Trail next year, and other agencies that kind of formed out of this effort, seen a lot of implementation, and it's encouraging to see that take place. With this Paved Trail Feasibility Studies grant program, the thought is that that can also support this plan. That it is a level of implementation of that planning document. So we encourage folks to have a look at this interactive map and identify projects that may have been in the Great Trails State Network, and push those projects forward for a feasibility study work. Your submittal does not have to be a project identified in this plan, and that may still be funded. It's just you could get extra consideration if you are submitting a project that was identified in our Great Trails State Plan. So next slide. And this is a network of the plan. As you can see, it hits, I believe, all counties. The kind of difficult to see, but the dark green is the proposed network, and then the draft alternate route as well. So some corridors may have a recommended route, but there may be an alternative that may be more appropriate. So both of those corridor links would be acceptable for identifying if something was in the Great Trails State Network for your application. And then there's also the potential with the spine network, which is just the basic the primary network for the network. So, but all this stuff is on our website, so I encourage you all to have a look. So next slide. And finally, this is our transportation disadvantage index. The link down there is you can go there to find more information on this tool. There's a webinar that we did. There's other supporting documents that you can utilize, and there's an ESRI story map that you can follow along to kind of get more information on this methodology and these tools. But we developed this tool really to incorporate to look at transportation disadvantaged areas in a lot of the work that we were doing in IMD and across DOT. So we wanted to pull it in this study as well. So what the tool does is it identifies areas where there may be potential transportation disadvantage. So it looked at these 6 indicators that you see on the left. This is zero vehicle ownership, lower income, elderly, youth, people with disabilities, and BIPOC populations as well. And we're adding in actually limited English proficiency too. So there will be another 7th indicator here pretty soon. But the idea is to take all these variables indicators to develop this index, and we're looking at it collectively, these variables collectively, to indicate where there may be potential transportation disadvantage. So we're not knowing for certain that what the outcomes are, but look at these things collectively. It may show you where, there may be transportation disadvantage. So with the feasibility studies grant program, we would like folks that can keep this in mind if they're submitting projects, because it could have some impact on how we end up selecting projects. You may get extra bonus points if you are in some areas of more transportation disadvantage. So next slide. And this is one other slide on the TDI, Transportation Disadvantage Index dashboard. And this is kind of what you'll see when you go into that link. Well, the link was Connect page, but there will be a link on the Connect page that takes you to the story map. And this is one of the tools that you will see. And you can zoom in. It goes by block group, so you can zoom in on areas. And we realized that the projects that are submitted for this study will, be spanning multiple block groups. So you may be capturing areas with low TDI scores or high TDI scores, but kind of keep that in mind when you're identifying areas. With what you're seeing here, this is the city of Henderson, and the areas that are more darker shaded are areas with greater transportation disadvantage, and lighter, or maybe a less disadvantage. So when you're completing your application, I encourage you to go in and see how your project aligns with this, or maybe it will help inform the project you select, which can impact, how we review your application. So next slide. Okay, hand it off to you, Joe.
All right, sounds good. We'll go through the application process here. So some process and key dates. So the issue call for applications went live on November 10th. The application submission deadline is January 9th, 2023. And then we're looking at board approval in February, March 2023. And of course, the notification of board and the notice to proceed will be based off the February or March there. And as John mentioned, we are going to be using the EBS portal for this grant application. Some of the application requirements. So we encourage you all to read each question carefully, answer all questions thoroughly and concisely, and use only the space provided in the application. Required application attachments will include a map of the study area, hyperlinks or digital copies to relevant previous plans or studies, municipal and county resolution, MPO and RPO resolution, and both of those I will mention can be in draft form. We just ask that only application, if you submit that in draft form, you indicate when you expect to have an adopted form available. We understand what time period we are in here with the holidays, and understand that could be a challenge. So the draft resolutions will work there. Resumes of the staff managing the study, and of course, letters of support. And applicants may submit resolutions following the application deadline, as I mentioned there. Those are materials on the attachments on the application. The grant application can be accessed through our EBS portal. So in order to view the application, you'll have to follow the instructions below. So if you're accessing the EBS portal for the first time, and we know that we've already had a few folks that fall into this category, and we expect to have some more. And I know there's probably some folks on the webinar today that don't already have an NCID. So if this is your first time going through this process, you do need to follow step 1 there and register as an individual for the NCID. The link there will provide additional resources, and if you have any issues or trouble with that, John and I are here to help you navigate that process. And then once you've done that, or if you already have an NCID, you will complete the EBS access request form. So that's the second link provided on the slide here. So you'll go through that access request form, and then just some inside baseball here. John and I will review and check with you if there's any information that needs to be updated or corrected. And then you'll get notification once you are approved, and then you'll have access to the application form. Just as a reminder, as John mentioned on the website that we have, that there is sort of the direct draft form for the application. So if you wanted to go ahead and take a look at that and start filling that out and saving it, you could go ahead and get started on that while but you're waiting on your NCID or EBS access request form approval. Selection criteria. So the following selection criteria proposed for the program and will affect project scoring. We're going to look at how well the grant proposal addresses questions and key prompts listed in the application, such as the study corridor considerations, community need, the proposed community engagement strategies, as well as project management experience and project implementation. We're also going to be looking at geographic location. NCDOT will support the equitable distribution of projects across the states. We will make sure that we are touching all the areas across the state and having a variety of different communities involved. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, inclusion in the Great Trail State Network, certainly an advantage there as we're really striving to implement that great planning document. The extent to which the project may be able to mitigate transportation disadvantage will be considered, as well as John mentioned earlier, the optional inclusion of a local match. We certainly want to make these dollars go as far as we can in as many communities as we can. So if you are a community that is available to include that local match, that'll certainly be considered in the selection criteria. Like I said, as we try to make sure that we can spread these dollars across the state as much as possible. Some general tips as you're going through the application process, just, of course, read each question carefully and answer all the questions thoroughly and concisely. Please make sure that you've got all the questions answered, especially, if you're copy and pasting over from a draft document, you want to make sure that you hit all those before you submit, using only the space provided on the application form. Reach out to your MPO and RPO for guidance and relevant information that they may maintain, such as planning documents, and just general application support. Utilize local staff members to answer the application questions where possible. Remember to note online references and materials where applicable, and review the feasibility study grant program overview for those eligibility criteria that we touched on earlier in the presentation. The demonstration of local support, so that will be pulled out in the application questions, and of course any letters of support that are attached to the application. Those can come from your businesses or along the corridor or nonprofit groups in the community. Make sure you're filling out the correct applications. So again, as we mentioned, if you're going for the feasibility study, you want to make sure that you're not looking at the multimodal planning study grant that will go live in January. So there's a little bit of overlap on the application periods there. So just want to make sure that you're looking at the right one. As a reminder, local match is not required as part of your application. But as we've mentioned, that could be considered in selection criteria. And as always, you can contact us with any questions you have as you're going through the application process. So this is John and I's contact information here. You can find that a variety of different ways, but our emails are there. So if you're going through this process and you have any issues that come up, definitely feel free to send us an email and we'll get you squared away however we need to. I think this brings us to the Q&A section.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
See, we've got some questions.
I think there were, I just lost my questions. Oh, here I am. Okay. Yeah, I think we can go through some of these questions, Joe. I can start if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then we can share. So I think there's a question on how long the study would take. And we're estimating once you kick off the project, you got all the estimate in and all that's ready to go, then we've estimated from the other work we did in the pilot studies about 6 to 12 months. So I think we're really kind of selling around 9 months is kind of what I think you're going to mainly what we may see on some of the work. It may be longer if you have a more complex project, but around 9 months for the work. I had a question on, is if community is interested in a rails to trails project, and would it qualify for this program? And yes, it would. So I think we want to look at, proposed trails along active class 1 rail lines would not be eligible, but I think that it would be, but generally this would be an eligible type of project. I think just communicating with the NCDOT's rail division before you submit, just to make sure it would be eligible and feasible project. So just reach out to Joe and me if there's more a specific project on a rail to trail, but generally that would be acceptable. Can you go to slide 14, I think, Joe? I think, let's see. Yeah. Or maybe it was that one, or the one, it deals with our planning grant program slide and that one, yeah, 13. Slide.
There we go.
Yeah, someone actually see this again. I guess the clarification on this is if folks are eligible to apply for each of these programs, but they're 2 separate programs. We were talking about the one on the bottom of the feasibility studies, and that's just identifying an individual project. And that's what's open now. In January, we open our planning grant program. So, but that's going to be a different type of product. You're going to be looking at more of a network and identifying multiple projects. And the idea really that kind of comes first before you do a feasibility study. So, but folks can apply for either of these based on what their needs are. So. Rose, the Great Trails Stake map. I just sent the link for I think Will asked for it too, for the interactive map. There was DOT's doing some website updates to finally to create new web pages for integrated mobility vision after our merger a few years ago, and they're still in that process. And when they made that update here a week or 2 ago, some of the links are no longer working properly. So I guess to make sure that we provide that, Joe. I think we have it accurately, but when folks go to search it, it's not popping up. And we have been in communication with IT about this, and we heard it from other folks before this webinar. Will consultants or DOT staff do the studies? We have a solid core of consultants and limited service our limited service contracts. 10 to 15, probably about 10 firms are qualified to do this work. So we will be using them and are very confident in the work that they perform. How many we'll be doing? I think it's hard to say. I think there'll be a few under that 500,000 threshold. A few will be doing sidewalks and side paths. Under that 2 million, we'll be doing greenways, paved trails, those types of things. So we're not limiting by geographies. We hope to get a good geography spread and in various highway divisions, but we're not certain what that will exactly look like. But we're going to be doing several of these all at the same time beginning next year. So, oh yeah, it will be. The idea is if we get enough requests for the 2.5 million, then we will do all those. And hopefully reapply or seek additional funding for future cycles. But if we do not spend it all and get enough application, we'll carry over the funds to the next grant cycle. There's a question, would a Bureau of Tourism looking at greenway and thread trails be eligible entity? I think we were limiting it to this. Maybe I'm not sure if this would be eligible. Joe, do you recall this, or we can look into this further?
I think if you want to reach out to us, we can look into that further. It may be a scenario where we could work with the municipality that the Bureau of Tourism falls under, and we could, figure out, the best way to who submits and then who's supporting.
Yeah, I agree. Good answer, Joe. Yeah.
So a couple of questions in here asking about a copy of the webinar presentation. So we are recording today. We'll have the slides and the recording posted just as soon as it's available later this afternoon, hopefully.
Okay. So do the submitted projects need to be NCDOT approved planning projects? I'm assuming that's in a planning NCDOT approved plan. No, they do not. Yeah, it can be at any locally adopted plan or regionally state plan.